Chapter 1 Beneath the Stones. Today, tourists walk through the ruins of the Roman Forum with cameras in hand and sun on their backs. But long before it was a ruin, before it was even Rome's political heart, it was a swamp. A foul, low-lying valley flooded by rain and runoff from the surrounding hills. The Palatine rose on one side, the Capitoline on the other. Between them lay a stagnant, muddy basin. In Rome's earliest days, around the 8th century BCE, this was not a prestigious location. Settlements existed on the hills, but the valley below was barely usable. However, the early Romans and their Etruscan kings had plans. Sometime around the 7th century BCE, likely during the reign of Tarquinius Priscus, Rome undertook one of its first great public engineering projects, the Cloaca Maxima. This massive stone-lined sewer was built to drain the marshy valley, channeling water directly into the Tiber River. Portions of the Cloaca Maxima still exist today, an enduring example of how Roman engineering began with necessity, not luxury. This transformation from swamp to civic space laid the foundation, literally and politically, for the rise of the Roman Forum. The earliest forum wasn't grand. It was a simple public square. But even then, it held meaning. Open-air markets were held there. Citizens gathered to settle disputes. Tribal leaders met to speak. By the time the Roman Republic was formally established in 509 BCE, the Forum had already become a place of law, trade, and debate. And as the Republic grew, the Forum evolved with it. Stone replaced mud. Markets were enclosed. Law courts, called basilicas, were built along its sides. Temples rose to honor the gods of state and city. By the 4th century BCE, the Forum had become the undisputed civic center of the Roman world. Modern archaeology backs the legend. Excavations reveal drainage channels that match the historical path of the Cloaca Maxima. Early post holes indicate temporary wooden structures replaced later by stone. Deep ash layers found beneath the Forum may be the aftermath of the Gallic sack of Rome in 390 BCE, when the city was burned and hastily rebuilt. Even deeper, buried shrines and archaic altars suggest that Rome's earliest religious activity began here, before the temples, before the Senate, even before the Republic itself. Some historians argue that the Forum's development wasn't just urban, it was spiritual. A space conquered not only by engineering, but by ritual. This valley, once uninhabitable, became sacred. It is perhaps fitting that Rome's future, its law, its power, its myth, was built on something so humble. A wet ditch, a technical problem, a place where no one wanted to live. But the Romans didn't just build cities, they imposed order, they conquered nature. The Forum is proof of that. Beneath every column and broken temple lies the memory of that first transformation, from water to stone to empire. Chapter 2 The Sacred Road, Via Sacra. Winding through the heart of the Forum like a black ribbon of volcanic stone, the Via Sacra, the Sacred Road, was the most important street in ancient Rome. Every triumph, every ritual, every funeral of state passed along this path. It was where power walked in public, where emperors were celebrated, and where the Roman people came to witness the theatre of empire. The Via Sacra ran from the Arch of Titus, near the Colosseum, to the Temple of Jupiter, Optimus Maximus on the Capitoline Hill, forming the spiritual and political axis of Rome. Though its exact course shifted slightly over the centuries, its symbolism never did. This was the road of the gods, and the road of memory. Its name wasn't poetic, it was literal. Sacra means sacred in Latin. In the earliest centuries of Rome, long before marble temples lined the Forum, this road was used for religious processions. High priests, augurs, and Vestal virgins would walk the Via Sacra during state rituals. Livy and Dionysius of Halicarnassus describe the route being used during the Lupercalia, the triumphs of early Roman kings, and processions for the Feriae Latinae, the old Latin festivals. But it was the Roman triumph that truly defined the Via Sacra in public memory. A Roman triumph was not a simple parade. It was a political, religious, and military ritual, granted only by a Senate vote after a major victory. The general being honoured, called the triumphator, would wear a purple toga with golden embroidery, echoing the robes of Jupiter himself, and a laurel wreath upon his head. He would ride in a chariot pulled by 4 white horses. The procession included the general's army, prisoners of war, exotic animals, war trophies, and towering floats displaying painted depictions of battles. The march began in the Campus Martius, entered the city via the Porta Triumphalis, then passed through the Forum Boarium, moved past the Arch of Titus, or earlier, the Arch of Septimius Severus, and entered the Forum Romanum via the Via Sacra. The entire population of Rome would turn out to watch. Senators in their togas, commoners in the upper balconies, prostitutes, freedmen, and priests, all sharing the same cobbled space. Historians like Pliny the Elder and Suetonius describe enormous crowds, lasting cheers, and days-long celebrations. And yet, in the midst of this spectacle, a reminder of mortality. Behind the general, a slave would stand, holding a golden crown above his head, whispering, "Memento mori." Remember, you are mortal, a chilling counterweight to divine glory. Not all who marched the Via Sacra were honoured. It was also the route of the condemned. During certain public executions, prisoners were paraded through the Forum, mocked by the crowd, and led to the Gemonian stairs, where they were strangled or beaten to death. Their bodies might be left there for days. Even the emperors themselves were not exempt. After Caligula's assassination, his corpse was reportedly dragged through the streets before being burned in haste. The road was also home to everyday life. Horace, in one of his satires, describes being harassed by a rambling philosopher while walking down the Via Sacra, proof that even the most sacred street was full of noisy life. "Ibam forte Via Sacra," he begins, "I was walking by chance down the sacred way." Physically, the road was paved in large basalt blocks, which were quarried from volcanic deposits near Rome. Over time, deep grooves were cut into the stones by wagon wheels, some of which are still visible today. Tourists walking through the Forum today are literally stepping in the ruts left by 2,000 years of Roman feet, chariots, and funerals. The Via Sacra was not just a road, it was a ceremonial archive. Every triumphal chariot, every sandal of a senator, every clattering wheel of a market cart added another line to the story of the Roman world. It bore witness to the rise of the Republic, the glory of the emperors, and the slow decay of an empire that ruled from pavement to sky. It was sacred. And it still is. Chapter 3. The Voice of Rome. The Rostra. In the centre of the Roman Forum stood a raised platform, unadorned in form but thunderous in meaning. It was called the Rostra, and for centuries it served as the voice of the Roman state. Its name came from war. In 338 BCE, after defeating the Latin city of Antium in a naval battle, Roman soldiers captured the bronze battering rams, Rostra, from enemy ships. These rams were mounted on the front of the speaker's platform as trophies, transforming a civic space into a monument of Roman victory. From that point on, the platform was called the Rostra. It was from here that magistrates addressed the people. Laws were proposed, decrees were read. Generals gave thanks. It was not merely a platform, it was a stage upon which the Republic performed itself. In the Republican era, the Rostra faced northwest toward the Curia, the Senate House. This orientation was symbolic. A speaker could address both the assembled crowd and the Senate behind them, a deliberate alignment of public and institutional power. The Senate ruled, but the people listened. Some of the most decisive speeches in Roman history were delivered here. Cicero's denunciation of Catiline in 63 BCE, when he accused a sitting senator of plotting to overthrow the state. Antony's funeral oration for Julius Caesar in 44 BCE, where he held up the murdered dictator's bloodied toga before a restless crowd. According to Plutarch and Appian, the display of Caesar's body on the Rostra incited the mob to riot, setting Rome on fire, both literally and politically. But the Rostra was not only a place of words, it was also a place of death. After Cicero was declared an enemy of the state in 43 BCE, Mark Antony had him hunted down and executed. His head and hands were nailed to the front of the Rostra, a gruesome punctuation mark on the end of the Republic's greatest orator. In the years of civil war and political purges, the platform became a place of spectacle. In 87 BCE, the heads of senators and political rivals were displayed after the Marian purges. Later, under Sulla, the tradition continued. Executed enemies were placed here as warnings. The Rostra evolved with the empire. Julius Caesar began construction of a new platform, reorienting it to face east toward the Forum of Caesar, a subtle shift that mirrored the growing dominance of individual rulers. Augustus completed the project, adorning the new platform with additional naval rams, some of which came from the Battle of Actium, where he defeated Antony and Cleopatra in 31 BCE. Modern excavations in the Forum have uncovered the bases of 3 separate rostra platforms, each built in different periods. Inscriptions from the time of Augustus and Diocletian confirm their use across centuries. Bronze fragments of actual ship rams, recovered nearby, support the ancient claims that these were not symbolic props, but real trophies of war. The rostra remained active into the imperial era. Public readings of imperial edicts, trials, and religious proclamations continued there, but its political weight declined. In the Republic, it had been the engine of public persuasion. Under the emperors, it became ceremonial, still loud, but no longer decisive. Even so, the stones carried memory. Romans remembered what had been said there, what had been shouted, and what had been silenced. The Rostra wasn't just a place where laws were proclaimed. It was where the fate of Rome could rise or fall, one sentence at a time. Chapter 4. Temples of the Eternal City. The Roman Forum was not only a political stage, it was a sacred landscape. Amid the marble courts and speakers' platforms stood temples that connected Rome to its gods, its founding myths, and its deepest values. At the western edge of the Forum, beneath the shadow of the Capitoline Hill, stood the Temple of Saturn. Built in the early Republic and later rebuilt in 42 BCE, it was one of the oldest sacred sites in Rome. Saturn was the god of wealth, agriculture, and time, and his temple was more than symbolic. It housed the aerarium, the state treasury. Gold and silver reserves, official contracts, and the records of Roman law were stored behind its walls. In a city built on conquest and commerce, it was fitting that Rome's wealth was watched over by the god of harvest and age. Just east of Saturn's temple stood the circular Temple of Vesta, perhaps the most sacred spot in all of Rome. It contained the eternal flame of the city, kept burning day and night by the Vestal Virgins, a select group of priestesses chosen as children and bound to 30 years of celibacy and service. The temple was round, unlike most Roman temples, echoing ancient hearth structures and the early domestic cults of Rome's past. If the flame were ever extinguished, it was believed Rome itself would fall. Behind the Temple of Vesta lay the House of the Vestals, a large complex where the priestesses lived, secluded from the rest of Roman society. statues of former Vestals lined the courtyard, and inscriptions on their pedestals survive to this day. Rare examples of Roman women recorded in stone, not as wives or mothers, but as public figures in their own right. Towards the centre of the forum stood the Temple of Castor and Pollux, the divine twins of Greek and Roman myth. According to legend, they appeared on horseback during the Battle of Lake Regillus in 496 BCE, securing a Roman victory. In gratitude, the state built a temple in their honour. It was more than religious. It served as a meeting place for the Senate and as a stage for public announcements. Even the front steps were used for market regulation, particularly for weights and measures. At the eastern end of the forum, facing the Via Sacra, was a more recent addition, the Temple of Divus Julius. Built in 29 BCE by Augustus, it was dedicated to his adoptive father, Julius Caesar, the first Roman to be officially deified. The temple was constructed on the exact spot where Caesar's body was cremated in 44 BCE, following his assassination. Its altar became a focal point for public devotion. Archaeologists have discovered coin offerings, pottery shards, and burned animal bones near the foundation, evidence of ongoing worship into the imperial period. Other sacred sites clustered nearby. The Temple of Concordia, symbolizing unity after civil conflict. The Temple of Venus and Roma, overlooking the Colosseum, one of the largest in Rome, built by Emperor Hadrian. And the Regia, once the royal residence of the early kings, which became the office of the Pontifex Maximus, Rome's chief priest. Together, these structures did more than house statues. They formed a religious topography, mapping Rome's political myths and spiritual obligations onto the landscape itself. Every god represented here had a civic function. Every temple told a story of law, victory, order, or survival. These temples were not quiet places. During festivals, their steps were crowded with garlanded animals, priests in ceremonial robes, the scent of burning incense and sacrifice in the air. Crowds gathered to watch, to pray, or to gossip. The forum was not a museum. It was alive with ritual and sound. Over centuries, many of these temples were rebuilt, restored, or reimagined. Some were turned into Christian churches. Others were stripped for marble in the Middle Ages. But even in ruin, they speak. Their broken columns and worn inscriptions remain, not just as relics, but as reminders of a city that believed its gods walked among men, and that no power, however vast, could last without divine favour. Chapter 5. The Curia Julia, House of Power. Tucked into the northern edge of the Roman Forum stands a building that, unlike many others around it, still has a roof. Its brick facade is modest, its windows small and high. Yet within these walls, some of the most consequential decisions in world history were debated and declared. This is the Curia Julia, the Senate House of ancient Rome. It was built by Julius Caesar in 44 BCE, intended to replace the older Curia Hostilia, which had stood on the same site for centuries but was damaged during political violence. Caesar wanted more than a renovation. He wanted to reshape the space where the Republic ruled, and the symbolism was clear. In redesigning the Senate House, he was reshaping the Republic itself. The new structure was grander and more formal. Its floor was paved with exotic coloured marbles, porphyry from Egypt, serpentine from Greece, and yellow giallo antico from Tunisia. The ceiling, long lost, was once richly coffered and painted. But despite these luxuries, the room was austere in function. 2 long benches ran along the walls, where senators sat facing one another, rank by rank. No stage, no throne, just voices, arguments, and the weight of the law. At its height, the Senate contained around 600 members, drawn from the aristocratic patrician class and wealthy plebeians who had risen through political ranks. To sit here was the summit of Roman political life. Every law, every tax, every war began with a debate inside these walls. The building was burned at least twice, once during Caracalla's reign and again under Diocletian. Each time it was rebuilt. The version that survives today is largely the result of Diocletian's reconstruction in 283 CE, although the foundation and layout remained faithful to Caesar's original design. It was inside the Curia that senators voted on the fate of allies and enemies, named emperors, passed tax reforms, and debated the boundaries of Roman expansion. But it was also a chamber of crisis. Power struggles, assassinations, and betrayals echoed here. After the murder of Caesar, ironically, not in the Curia, but in the nearby theatre of Pompey, this very building was briefly closed and politically stained. The balance between Senate and strongman had finally broken. Still, the Senate survived the Republic. Under Augustus and his successors, it became more ceremonial, but remained an essential symbol of legitimacy. Emperors still appeared before it. Senators still held prestige. Even Christian emperors in the 4th century CE continued to use the Curia as a governing space, though now under a different god. Inside, the most powerful men in the empire debated within a space barely large enough to hold a crowd. It wasn't size that gave the Curia authority. It was memory. Every man who sat on those stone benches knew he was part of a tradition older than almost any living institution in the world. And yet, its survival is almost accidental. In the 7th century CE, long after the Western Empire had fallen, the building was converted into a church, the Church of Saint Adrian. Ironically, this Christian transformation is what preserved it. While other pagan structures were looted for marble or collapsed into rubble, the Curia's walls were spared. Today, visitors can still walk inside. They can stand on the same floor where laws were forged and history turned. The silence feels heavy, not from age, but from the echoes of arguments that once decided the fate of the Mediterranean. It is a modest building by modern standards, but for centuries, this room was the engine of a world-spanning republic, and later an empire that imagined itself eternal. Chapter 6: Triumph and Terror, the Forum's Dark Side. The Roman Forum is often remembered for its temples, triumphs, and speeches, but for all its grandeur, the Forum was also a theatre of terror. Rome did not hide its violence, it put it on display. The same ground that bore senators and sacred processions also witnessed the shaming, execution, and mutilation of enemies of the state. To walk through the Forum was to walk across a battleground of memory, one that celebrated order, but never forgot who enforced it. At the base of the Capitoline Hill, near the edge of the Forum, lay the Gemonian Stairs, the Scalae Gemonia. These stone steps were infamous in the Roman world. They were the final stop for those condemned by the Senate or the Emperor. After execution, usually by strangulation, the bodies of traitors and criminals were tossed down the steps and left to rot in full view of the public. Dogs scavenged. The stench lingered. This was no accident. It was a warning. The historian Suetonius describes how Sejanus, once the powerful head of the Praetorian Guard under Emperor Tiberius, was dragged through the Forum and killed, his corpse left on the Gemonian stairs for days as crowds jeered. His children were executed beside him, a reminder that no status could protect you from the wrath of the state. The Rostra, normally a place of speeches and lawmaking, could quickly become a place of terror. The severed heads of political enemies were nailed to its front, their names known to the crowd, their deaths celebrated or feared. After the death of Cicero in 43 BCE, his head and hands were displayed here by order of Mark Antony, a gruesome act of vengeance. Ancient sources, including Appian and Cassius Dio, confirm that the gesture was not merely personal. It was theatrical, calculated, and public. Even triumphs, the grandest events in the Roman calendar, held an edge of menace. The triumphal procession that marched down the Via Sacra often included prisoners of war, paraded in chains before their final execution. Captured kings, generals, and rebels were dragged through the Forum to remind the people, and Rome's enemies, what happened to those who defied the Republic. The most famous example is Vercingetorix, the Gallic chieftain who led a massive rebellion against Caesar. After his defeat at Alesia in 52 BCE, he was held in a Roman prison for 6 years. When Caesar finally celebrated his triumph, Vercingetorix was paraded through the Forum before being strangled in the Tullianum, Rome's most notorious underground prison, just steps from the Curia. The Tullianum, also known as the Mamertine prison, was the last stop for Rome's highest-profile enemies. According to tradition, both St. Peter and St. Paul were imprisoned there. The cell was dark, damp, and cramped, a death sentence in all but name. Riots also exploded in the Forum. When Julius Caesar was assassinated in 44 BCE, Mark Antony gave a fiery speech in front of the Temple of Caesar. The mob, enraged, burned Caesar's body on an improvised pyre right in the Forum. The heat scorched the paving stones. Looting followed. The Forum became chaos. Even during peacetime, the threat of violence hung heavy over the space. Public punishments, whippings, branding, even executions by wild beasts, were sometimes carried out here or announced here. Laws were posted on bronze tablets for all to see, but justice was not blind. It was brutal. Rome's power was legal, yes, but it was also theatrical. By placing its punishments in the public eye, the state reminded its people that order did not come cheaply. It came through control, through fear, through force. The Forum was not just the center of Roman law. It was a visible engine of authority, a place where power didn't just speak. It punished. Chapter 7. The Fall of the Forum. For nearly 1,000 years, the Roman Forum was the epicenter of political, religious, and legal life in the Western world. But no empire lasts forever. The fall of the Forum did not come from fire or conquest alone. It came from slow decay, shifting priorities, and the rising tide of a new religion. The decline began in the 3rd century CE, when Rome was shaken by military crises, assassinations, and economic collapse. Emperors rose and fell in quick succession. Civil wars drained resources, and while the Forum still stood as a symbol of tradition, it was no longer the beating heart of Roman government. Under emperors like Diocletian and Constantine, Rome's administrative focus shifted eastward. Constantinople became the new imperial capital in 330 CE. With it went the Senate's relevance, the emperor's presence, and much of the Forum's political life. But it was the spread of Christianity that changed the Forum more profoundly than any invading army. Temples to pagan gods were closed by imperial edict. The Temple of Vesta, once home to the eternal flame, was extinguished by Emperor Theodosius I around 394 CE. The Vestals were disbanded, and their house fell into ruin. The Temple of Saturn, once a treasury, became an empty shell. Statues of gods were removed. Some were broken or repurposed. Christian basilicas began to rise in other parts of the city, and with them, the religious gravity of Rome shifted. Churches like San Giovanni in Laterano and Old St. Peter's drew pilgrims and imperial patronage. The Forum, still filled with reminders of the old gods, was left behind. The sack of Rome by Alaric the Visigoth in 410 CE did further damage. Though the Forum wasn't the main target, its psychological authority was shattered. Rome could fall, and now everyone knew it. In the centuries that followed, the Forum became a quarry. Marble was stripped from temples and monuments to build new churches, palaces, and even lime kilns. Bronze clamps and fixtures were pulled from the Colosseum and elsewhere, leaving behind pockmarked stone. Roofs collapsed. Statues disappeared. Earthquakes in 847 and 1349 caused further structural damage. With drainage systems no longer maintained, sediment from the surrounding hills slowly buried the Forum, raising the ground level by several meters. The ruins disappeared beneath layers of soil, debris, and medieval construction. By the 10th century, the Forum was no longer a civic space. It was a pasture. Locals called it the Campo Vaccino, the cow field. Goats grazed where senators once spoke. Farmers dug shallow graves beside broken columns. Churches were built atop ancient foundations, their names and purposes unrelated to the gods and temples they replaced. The memory of the Forum survived in texts, but its location was obscured. It wasn't until the Renaissance, when scholars like Poggio Bracciolini began studying Roman ruins, that the site drew serious interest. Artists and architects sketched its arches. Antiquarians tried to match ruins with classical accounts. Still, much of it remained buried. It wasn't until the 18th and 19th centuries that serious excavations began. Under popes and archaeologists, the soil was cleared. Temples were unearthed. Foundations were mapped. And slowly the Forum began to return, fragment by fragment. Even today, excavations continue. Beneath the visible stones lie deeper layers, Etruscan-era buildings, archaic altars, buried shrines. The Forum is a vertical city, its history layered like a geological cross-section of Roman civilization. What fell was not just a collection of buildings, but a way of thinking, a system in which religion, law, and spectacle were inseparable, carved in stone and paraded in public. Its fall was not sudden, it was a long forgetting, but the stones remember. Chapter 8. What Remains Today. Walk the Roman Forum today, and you walk through time. What was once the most powerful square in the ancient world now lies open to the sky, its stones cracked, its columns broken, its meaning transformed by silence. But beneath the ruin, the bones of empire still lie visible. Much of the Forum was lost for over 1,000 years, buried beneath layers of mud, medieval houses, and grazing fields. It wasn't until the 18th century that archaeologists began uncovering it seriously. The work continues even now, slow, careful, and filled with new discoveries. Some structures remain remarkably intact. The Curia Julia, the Senate house built by Julius Caesar, still stands with its walls and roof. Its preservation is largely due to its conversion into a church in the 7th century, sparing it from the scavenging that destroyed many other buildings. The Arch of Septimius Severus, erected in 203 CE to celebrate Roman victories in the East, stands tall at the Forum's western end. Though blackened by centuries and missing many of its original bronze decorations, its reliefs still show Roman soldiers, captives, and processions in fine detail. The 3 columns of the Temple of Castor and Pollux rise alone from their foundation, all that remains of what was once one of the grandest temples in the city. Nearby, the low round foundation of the Temple of Vesta sits quietly beneath the open sun, where Rome's eternal flame once burned day and night. The Rostra, the speaker's platform, has been reconstructed from multiple historical phases. Its bronze ship rams are long gone, but the platform still marks where Cicero spoke and where Antony turned the city against Caesar's killers. The basilica of Maxentius and Constantine dominates the eastern edge of the Forum, its massive vaulted arches still standing. It was the last great imperial building constructed in the Forum, finished in the early 4th century. One wing collapsed in an earthquake. The The rest remains, colossal and solemn. Scattered throughout the site are fragments of altars, shrines, columns, and inscriptions, many unlabeled, many mysterious. Some are part of structures still being excavated. Others belong to buildings we can no longer fully identify. Walk the Via Sacra, and you can still see ruts carved by chariot wheels pressed into the basalt over centuries. At the forum's centre, there's a stone platform known as the lapis niger, the black stone, long thought to mark the grave of Romulus, or perhaps the site of a sacred shrine. Its inscription, written in archaic Latin, remains one of the oldest in Roman history, dated to the 6th century BCE. This is what remains. Not just monuments, but layers of memory. Visitors come for the ruins, but they leave with something more. A sense of scale, of time, of ambition and collapse. The Forum is not just a field of stones. It is a record of how power was built, how belief was practiced, and how empires leave echoes. Here, in the dust and marble, Rome still speaks, not in voices, but in silence. A silence heavy with everything that once was. The Roman Forum is no longer a stage of empire. The speeches have ended, the temples have fallen, the laws have faded, but the stones remain. They remind us that power, no matter how vast, is temporary, that even the strongest republic can fall, and that belief in gods, in institutions, in identity, can outlast the walls that once held them. What we've explored here is only part of the story. The Forum is still being studied, still being excavated, still being understood. New findings and scholarship continue to refine what we know. Every word in this documentary has been based on historical and archaeological evidence, cross-checked with trusted academic sources to bring you a narrative that's not only powerful, but accurate. If you enjoyed this journey into the ruins and legacy of ancient Rome, please consider subscribing to History's Edge here on YouTube. Your support helps this channel grow, bring more high-quality documentaries to life, and keep history sharp, honest, and alive. Thank you for watching.